The Bible is very clear and also encouraging along the lines of us understanding that we continuously need to be renewed and reoriented. Renewed and reoriented. For an example, to be renewed in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16, Paul just kind of takes it for granted as he makes this statement when he says, though our outward man is perishing, our inward man is being renewed day by day. And so there's something that's taking place within us that needs to take place within us to renew us, to make us stronger, as every day tends to take things out of us and to deplete us. And it was so important to the apostle that in Ephesians 3, as he closes his doctrinal discussion of redemption, that he prays that we might be strengthened in our inner being. Strengthened, renewed, so that that strength is poured in continuously. We also need to be reoriented, because the world has a way of guiding us and putting us in certain way and moving our eyes off of where they should be. And we need to be reoriented. The psalmist said in Psalm 119, verses 59 and 60, that when he thinks upon his ways, he immediately turns his attention to the statutes of God and then turns his attention even further to doing what they say, understanding that he can become disoriented to what reality really is. And so that's important for us. When, as we've said before, if you see a person who has a healthy soul, a person who is spiritually healthy, it's because they have done the things necessary day in and day out to renew themselves and to reorient themselves. Because God is the one who does it for us, but He's given us the way to do it, and we have to show up. He's willing to renew us, He's willing to reorient us, but we've got to show up and let Him do what He does. And so as God cares for our soul, it's very important that we do those things that are necessary. And thus, that makes me think about my favorite psalm, Psalm 23, which we're not going to look at all of it this morning, just a little bit, and in some other places. But there's an important phrase in that psalm that needs to be understood. And that is when the psalmist says in Psalm 23:3, He restores my soul. What all is involved in that? What does He mean? And how does that change us? So let's begin, first of all, by offering an explanation of what we mean of Psalm 23:3 when it says that He restores my soul. Now, it has reference. There are two things we want to look at in Psalm 23:3 and then one in Psalm 23:5. But the first one in 23:3, when it says He restores my soul, He has reference to downtime, that is, being cast in life's difficulties. So, most dogs tend to, have you ever watched a dog go to lay down? How they'll do that circle and circle and circle and drop. Okay? Well, sheep are very similar to that. They'll do that circle, 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 drop, except they're about as coordinated as I am. And so they just, and so it becomes very easy for them. If they find a spot out in the field that they're looking for, and it's got a crevice in it, and they're thinking, I'm going to go lay down in that spot. And they'll do their circle, and then they plop down, and it slides out from under them, and they end up on their back. Well, sheep are not coordinated. They can't get up from that. So, that process is described as being cast, when a sheep is cast. For an example, in Psalm 42, David builds on this understanding when he says in verses 4, 5, and 11, "Why are you cast down, O my soul?" It doesn't mean necessarily that you've been cast down to the ground more than it does the idea of the sheep in that sense of panic that takes place. And when that sheep is overturned, it can't get up. And because it can't get up, you have a lot of gases that begin to move their way throughout the body of the sheep and begin to threaten its life. You have all of the blood flow, the circulation isn't working the way that it should. All the blood is flowing down. And then, of course, the most obvious being, you're exposed to a predator. So if you're on your back as a sheep, you immediately panic because Well, mainly, primarily, they're probably thinking about being exposed to a predator, but there are many other things that can go wrong in this process. So then the shepherd comes and he finds them. And then he goes through the process that the psalmist is referencing in Psalm 23 when he says, he restores my soul. You see, it's not like dealing with a cat. You just pick it up, flop it down, and it'll just run. With this process, you have to be very cautious, okay? So if the sheep is on its back, you don't know how long it's been there, so you take it and you move it to its side and just roll it over and let it lay on its side for a little while, okay? You're talking to it, trying to get it calmed down and just trying to soothe it. And then after a little more time, you roll it even further to where it's got its feet tucked underneath and it's laying on its stomach. Then as more time passes, you start rubbing their legs a little bit and you allow them to stand up. Try to rub their legs and get the blood flowing again. Then they're allowed to stand up. Then you let them run a little bit. But for the rest of the day, they're going to stay right by your side as you watch over them. And if they continue to do well, the next day you'll let them turn loose and go back to their normal practices. So what is the point that David is making when he's talking about this? When he just mentions this phrase, he restores my soul. Well, David is talking about the many times in his life when he was on his back. And he was in the midst of a panic. Maybe he was running from Saul. Maybe he was running from Absalom. And he was on his back wondering, am I going to survive? Is my enemy going to win? Are the difficulties of life going to take my life? Are they going to do me in? Is it going to threaten my spiritual life? And spiritually, that's the way we can be. We can have something happen to us in life and we just feel like we're on our back and it's just like a panic. You're just stuck. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to turn. You're just hoping that something somewhere along the way can help you. Well, that's why the shepherd, he knows when a sheep is missing. And he will leave the others behind to go and find the one who is missing. And he will go through that process. And so when we're talking about restoring the soul, sometimes we have reference to those moments of panic. Those moments of extreme crisis and difficulty in which God is coming to our aid and coming to our rescue to help us. You know, sometimes we kind of have this tendency that we want people to act, metaphorically like cats. You're on your back? Come on. Get it together. Let me just plop you down on your feet. You should be off. And how much longer are you going to drag this thing out? How much longer can you allow this to affect you? Please understand something. People may do that, but God never will. And as people, we need to take a cue from our God that we don't treat people that way. That there is a process of getting our feet back under us and getting our spiritual legs exercised again to where we're ready to run the way that we did before. And it takes time, and we have to go through that process of restoration. But what I want us to spend the majority of our time on this morning is captured in the 5th verse of the 23rd Psalm when he talks about quality time with each sheep. He says this, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." Now, what he has reference to in this particular section is at the end of the day, usually throughout the day, but certainly at the end of the day, the shepherd will have all the sheep pass in front of him. He's going to put them in a sheepfold for the night. It's a temporary dwelling place that he has built or has had built, depending upon where he is. And so every sheep at that point will begin to enter the sheepfold, but he will spend time with every single sheep. He will first inspect them for deficiencies, for scratches, for things along those lines. And so he takes the oil medicinally and he anoints them where they need that. Furthermore, if they're after he completes that inspection, he's just going to play with every one of them. He's going to spend time with them. He might even wrestle with them. The relationship between a shepherd and his sheep is one of the sweetest relationships on earth. He has fun with them. He has nicknamed them. And he knows every single one of them. People say, how close can they really be? Well, modern day Arabic shepherds have been blindfolded. And we're only allowed to feel the face of their sheep. And we're not talking about a few sheep, we're talking about hundreds. Only allowed to feel the face. And with a blindfold over their eyes, feeling the face, they called every one of their sheep by name and never missed a one. They know their sheep because they spend time with them every day, investing in them and loving them and helping them. And what we need to see when we think about this, about God restoring us and spending this time with us, we need that time with God every single day. We need time with God every single day. There is never a day when we do not need to spend time alone with God. Never. The day doesn't exist. That's why Jesus, and Jesus picks up on this imagery. That's why Psalm 23 is fleshed out so well when you come to the New Testament. He's the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep in John 10:11. He's the great shepherd of our souls, Hebrews 13 and verse 20. He's the shepherd and overseer of our souls in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. He's the chief shepherd in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 4. And on and on and on we can go with all of the references to Jesus as he shepherds us. We need to spend time with him. The idea is that of a relationship. Okay? And relationship, for those who may be allergic to human emotion, and there are some of those people that are just allergic to human emotion. I don't understand them, but they do exist. Okay? But in order for relationships to work, emotion is not going to rule the day, but emotion must be present. And more important, and even beyond that, faithfulness must be there. That faithfulness every single day of showing up and investing in another person. In particular here, investing my time in God, casting myself upon him and spending time with him. That's done, look, the only way that's done is in two-way communication. When I open up the Bible and I read and God speaks into my life, and then when I fold my hands and pray, and then I speak to God. That's two-way communication as we build and as we grow a relationship together and as God bends us to his will. So that's the basic premise of what we're looking at. Now, I want us to think, number two, about why this is so essential. Why is this so essential that we do this? Well, first, I don't think I have to convince anyone that we live in a fast-paced world. We live in a fast-paced society. I'm not saying it's wrong or it's right. I'm just saying it's a reality. Okay? So, here's one of the things we should be extremely cautious of, though. As Americans, as understanding we live in a fast-paced society. In Mark chapter 4, when Jesus is giving the parable of the sower, all right? Jesus is giving the parable of the sower. You remember he said that there was some that fell amongst thorns. And he says in verse 18, of those who were sown among thorns, they are those who hear the word, but the cares of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. Here's one of the things we have to understand. The devil does not have to get us to go into immorality to win us to his side. He doesn't have to do that. This goes back, we can trace this thing all the way back. You can go to the compromises of Pharaoh and the Exodus. The devil isn't concerned. He doesn't have to win you right now. If he can win you over a period of 100 years, he'll do it. But also, if he can't get you to embrace immorality, Well, then he's got some other tricks up his sleeve. And one of his main tricks that he uses quite often is, I'll just make you so busy that God gets squeezed out of your life. Isn't that what he said? The cares of this world. Listen, there are things people say, okay, so what are the cares of this world? Well, I got to make a living. I got to do this. I got to spend time with this. I got to go over there. I got to do this. And I would say that many of those things you list are probably biblically accurate. But when those things begin to crowd out the main thing, that's when they become a problem. Notice, the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, they choke the word. He didn't say, you know what, I'm done with Christianity. That's not what the person who falls amongst the thorn does. Or you know what, I think I'd just rather live like the rest of the world. No. They simply get so busy that God gets pushed out of the equation. And that's one of the greatest dangers that we have, especially in a society that prizes busyness, right? We almost wear it as a badge of honor. Man, I'm just so busy. Listen, there are two things that we need to think about when it comes to our investment of our time. Well, multiple things, but there's two I want to talk about here. One, a question I was asked a long time ago that shifted my thinking on this was, if God were in charge of your calendar, what would it look like? If God were in charge of your calendar, what would it look like? Because all of these things that we think we have to do and we have to be invested in, we need to rethink all of these things. We need to even think about how we talk about them. Okay? So someone says, I have got to mow my yard. Okay, I'm not anti-mowing your yard, okay, obviously. Someone says, I've got to. Now, wait a minute. Let's put that in more realistic terms. Is somebody going to show up and arrest you if you don't mow your yard? Probably not. Is someone going to show up and shoot you if you don't mow your yard? Is God going to condemn you if you don't mow your yard? All right, then let's speak about it in its proper category. It may be something that is necessary and that is good and needs to be done, but it is not the highest of priorities in the world. Listen, I lived in Kentucky, and those people are obsessive about their yards. Every single one of them. Doesn't make any sense. They mowed it 3 times a week. Didn't make any sense to me. I was like, I mean, come on, get a life. I mean, and the ones around us, if you mowed your yard, it didn't matter if they mowed it yesterday. If they saw you out there, they were going to start mowing theirs too. I mean, it was insane. But also, as parents, this is one thing we need to think about. As parents, we want our kids to be involved. We want to keep them busy and integrated, right? We want to develop them. We want to try and keep them out of trouble if we can find something that they're passionate about. But if we're honest, sometimes we're pushing our kids in so many different directions because we feel like we're a bad parent if we tell them no. Because my generation especially was told that, you know, if you don't let your kids do X, Y, and Z, then they will grow up and they will be underdeveloped human beings. You will scar them for life. Listen, when I was 13 years old, my dad came to me and said, look, you are welcome to play baseball all you want, but we're not playing all-star anymore. We're not traveling. We're not doing anything else. And you know what? I didn't grow up and become a serial killer. I don't hate my dad to this day for the decision he made. I understand why my dad did that. He had 4 sons, and you know what? He didn't have $30,000 extra every year for me to run around playing ball. Now, that's okay if other people do it. The point I'm making is we can make tough decisions with our kids, and they still turn out okay. A lot of the times what we're doing because we feel guilty, like we're somehow depriving them. And one of the things I've wanted to say for so long to people in my generation is this. People say, I want to give them everything that my parents couldn't give me, or I want to give them exactly what my parents gave me, or even more. Okay? But don't forget to give them what your parents did give you. And that is your time, your love, and your investment in their lives. So we end up becoming incredibly busy, and we can get to the end of a day and go, did I even pray today? Did I ever crack the Bible today? We need time to focus on the things that really matter. And here's one thing I know that the Bible is very clear on, and that is spending time alone with God. And I'm not talking about you're going out into the woods and building a fire and living there for like the next 3 hours. I'm talking 15 minutes. I'm talking 30 minutes, an hour, whatever works for you. Spending time alone with God, and see how that alone time with God permeates down into every other aspect of your life. Because you see, this is what happens. A lot of times we run ourselves ragged. Let me ask you this. What type of person are you when it comes to the gas tank in your car? You don't know what I'm talking about? Are you the person who gets halfway empty and you're ready to go fill it up? Or are you the person that thinks, I can make it? When clearly there's nothing left. I can tell you this, most people in our nation today, when it comes to taking care of their spiritual health, they rarely seek help until they're absolutely bone dry. The time to refill is not when you're bone dry. The time to refill is every single day. Top off the tank, top off the tank, top off the tank. That's why God told Joshua when he took over the leadership of the Israelites, meditate in my law day and night. Psalm 1, describing the blessed man, says that he walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law, or on his law, he meditates day and night. It's essential because we feel, if we're not careful, everything gets squeezed out. So, let's look at the New Testament, Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, and see what Jesus shows us about how to do this. Mark 1, beginning in verse 29. It says, and immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and her fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. And the whole city was gathered together at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons, and he did not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. And rising very early in the morning while it was still dark, he departed and he went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. What's going on? Jesus is involved in ministry. Obviously, it's being very successful, right? He's got people showing up by droves to the place where he's staying to be healed. And so Jesus is pouring himself into and pouring himself into people and pouring himself into people and pouring himself into people. But what do you also see Jesus doing? While everybody else is still asleep, he gets up and he goes and he spends time with God. So when I was in preaching school, one of the illustrations they would give, they would bring a styrofoam cup in and they would fill it with water. And they would talk to us and they'd say, look, this is you. Now, every week, you've got AM sermon, PM sermon, class, probably 2 or 3. And then they would take a pencil and they would stab the bottom of the cup 3 or 4 times. They'd let the water flow out. You got to make some visits, pop it again. You got Bible studies with people, popped another hole in the bottom. What were they trying to tell us? How long does it take to run that cup completely dry with that many holes in it? Not long. So their point was that life in general and ministry in particular is like this cup. You're going to constantly be giving yourself. And if you're not pouring something else in, it's not going to be long before you've got nothing left to give. And that's true for husbands and wives and fathers and mothers. If we're not putting anything else in, we're not going to have anything to give. Listen, killing myself at my job, as most men do, killing myself at my job and going home and letting my wife and kids get the worst version of me possible is not being a good husband and a good father. Taking care of myself, saying yes and saying no to the right things at my job so that I am renewed and restored and ready to go home and do my most important work. That's the right thing. And one of the ways we do that is by keeping God where he belongs, right at the center of it all. And in this context, that's what Jesus does. Notice he picks a time period. He gets up very early in the morning while it is still dark. That's what worked for him. And he goes out into a solitary or to a desolate place. Nobody else around. Nobody's going to distract him. You want to know, I love cold weather. I love the winter. But there are other times when I don't like it. Because sometimes I like to go and hide where nobody can find me. And usually that involves a park somewhere. And everywhere else somebody can find me. I don't want to be found. I want to be alone with God. I don't want to question. I don't want to hear a story. I don't want to be interrupted. I want to be alone with God. I've got the rest of the day to do those things. I want to be alone with God. He chose a place where he knew he was alone. But also focus that he chose a place. There was a place that he when you look at Jesus' life, his spiritual life, and the gospel accounts, he's always in a mountain somewhere praying, or he's always in a desolate place where nobody is. He always makes it a priority to go somewhere and to be by himself. And then to spend his time in purpose, praying to God. So, how does this then come down to us and execute it? We'll take the 4 things that Jesus did here. Find the time period. And that's different for each person. Okay? That's different for each person. Some people it's in the morning, some people it's night, some people it's while they're doing something at work where they don't, it doesn't demand their full attention. Some people it's a lunch break. Whenever it is, you have to find that period that works for you. And spend that time and invest that time in the right way. But it also needs to be a peaceful place. All right? The best time to have devotional time is not when I got 3 boys wrestling in the floor. But dads, let me say this, especially dads with young kids, let me say this. We need to make sure she has time for her devotional time. If that's during bath time, we're doing bath time, and she goes by herself, and she has her time. If that's bedtime, putting them to sleep, she goes and has that time to herself, where it's just her and God, where she can be restored, she can be renewed. That's part of leading our families. It needs to be a peaceful place, but also having a place designated for this really becomes important. There's something about the psychology of it all, knowing that in this place, this is what I do. That when you sit down, your mind and body, it just automatically locks in and engages. It takes time to develop that, but once it's developed, it's there. When you sit down in that chair, your mind automatically just takes over. And do it with purpose. Sit down and spend time with God, pray and commune, and do those things each and every day. A lot of times people say, when they look at spiritual people, how did they get that way? How did they become that way? Well, let me ask you this. When it comes to people who have been able to build wealth, how did they get that way? Did they magically wake up one day and they had invested correctly and were just zillionaires overnight? It has happened, but that's not the norm. If a person reaches that level, they've done a few things, right? They have learned not to spend more money than they make. They have learned to invest money, to make their money work for them, and to put it to work so that it returns even more. People say, well, I thought there was some magic secret. It's not a magic secret. How does a person become spiritual? It's nothing magic. My friend Jason used to always joke when we were preaching together in Oxford, Alabama. He would say, there was this serum that when we graduated, they pulled us into this room. When we graduated from preaching school and from university, they pulled us into this room. They gave us this special serum that said, look, this is how you do ministry right here. You're going to drink this, and it's going to make you like uber spiritual. No, it's not. I want to read you one statement of something I came across in reading this week. And yes, I'm going a little bit longer because we're going to eat in a minute and we're all okay. He says this: I once watched a public television series based on interviews with survivors from World War II. The soldiers recalled how they spent a particular day. One sat in a foxhole all day. Once or twice a German tank drove by and he shot at it. Excuse me. Others played cards and frittered away time. A few got involved in some furious firefights, but nothing major. Mostly the day passed like any other for any infantrymen on the front line. Later, they learned they had just participated in one of the largest, most decisive engagements of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. It did not feel decisive to any of them at the time because no one had the big picture of what was happening elsewhere. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's final surge to kind of push the Allies back over the Rhine and to get them out of Germany. So he's saying it was just like a normal day. A few skirmishes here and there, nothing major. Listen to what he applies it to. Great victories are won when ordinary people execute their assigned tasks and a faithful person does not debate each day whether he or she is in the mood to follow the sergeant's orders or to show up at a boring job. We exercise faith by responding to the task that lies before us, for we have control only over our actions in the present moment. I sometimes wish the gospel writers had included the details of Jesus' life when he was in his ministry, or when he was still working as a carpenter. He says, a person reared in a Christian home who has absorbed the faith along with other family values from trusted parents will one day face a crisis that puts loyalty to the test. She may have had religious experiences and may have felt something of the closeness of God. Without warning, that sense vanishes. She feels nothing except doubts over all that has gone before. Faith loses all support of feeling, and she wonders if she's been living under an illusion. At such a moment, it may feel very foolish to hold on to faith regardless. Yet, as Ignatius counsels, now is the time to stand firm. Faith can survive periods of darkness, but only if we cling to it in the midst of darkness. What's his point? By getting up every single day, spending time alone with God, praying and studying, praying and studying, praying and studying, praying and studying. You don't see anything major happening, but it's happening. Every single day, faithfulness to the task at hand. That's what God is calling us to do. And one day we get to the end of our lives and we look back and realize, I'm a completely different person than I was when I began. And it wasn't anything special. It was just faithfully spending time with God every single day, and he made me into what he wanted me to be. He restores my soul every single day, if I go to him and allow him to. Maybe this morning somebody is in need of restoration in their soul. If we'll come to Jesus with a penitent faith, confessing him to be immersed in water for the forgiveness of our sins, he creates us, makes us new again, 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 17. Or maybe as a New Testament Christian, our soul is on empty. Maybe because of sin, maybe because of the difficulties of life. And we want to pray about it together. That's something we're happy to do. That's something we want to talk about in private. That's certainly something we can do as well. But now is an opportunity, and if you have a need, we'd love to help you if we can as we stand and sing this song.